Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for another discussion on diversity, equity, and inclusion with the Poulsbo Rotary Club. This is our second discussion in a series of 6, touching upon different areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Today, our topic will be diving into microaggressions. What are they? How can we recover from them? And how can we build more inclusive organizations? So I'm very excited to be here with you today. My name is Jamie Hollis. My pronouns are she and her. I've worked in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion for about the last 15 years, and am very excited to be tackling this topic with you today. So I'd like to take the opportunity now to introduce you to our speakers today, who's going to be engaging in this important conversation. First, we have Kim McCoy. Kim is a proud Rotarian with the Poulsbo Club and lives in Kingston, Washington. Kim has worked for over 40 years in the nonprofit world and has worked at every level from case manager to executive director. These nonprofits focused on issues of homelessness, abuse, mental health, mentoring, animal welfare, and other international focus areas. Kim has also spent 25 years as a consultant on diversity, equity, and inclusion at the local, regional, and national level. She serves on a variety of local boards and is vice chair of the Fishline Poulsbo organization. Fishline serves North Kitsap community by providing the necessary food, emergency services, and resources for folks in need in that community. Kim currently serves as the executive director of Path from Poverty, an organization that supports the empowerment of women who are impoverished in rural Kenya. There, they are working with the local community to change the harsh reality of water inequity in that part of the world. So, Kim, I'm so excited to have you with us today. With Kim is Dr. Roberta J. Wilburn, and I'm so excited to have Dr. Roberta with us today. She is an award-winning diversity and inclusion expert who champions diversity, equity, and inclusion while inviting people to enhance their intercultural skills and build authentic relationships with people from diverse backgrounds in order to promote cross-cultural understanding. She's a best-selling author, diversity trainer, cultural coach, and racial justice advocate, and works with people who are serious about uncovering their hidden biases and doing the necessary work to become culturally sensitive and responsive advocates and allies. Using her REAL, REAL, diversity, equity, and inclusion framework, she teaches and encourages others how to embrace cultural differences, disrupt racist practices, and foster collaboration and authentic relationships with people from diverse backgrounds. She also uses a faith-based perspective so they can excel in a diverse and inclusive world. Dr. Wilburn is also president and co-founder of Wilburn and Associates, LLC, a consulting organization that focuses on diversity training, intercultural coaching, courageous conversations, and cultural events. She's married to James Wilburn Jr., and they have 3 adult children and 3 grandsons. Dr. Roberta is joining us today from Spokane, Washington. So again, excited to have you both here to lead us in this discussion. I'd like to remind folks that are with us either on Facebook or YouTube that you can submit questions during our discussion. Just enter them in the chat box and we will be taking a look at those and bringing them forward to our experts. So with that, Roberta and Kim, I'll hand it over to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Jamie. Thank you very much. Dr. Roberta, it's just a pleasure to be here with you today and to share with our Rotary audience and others that are listening to us. And I know that this hour that we have together hopefully will be very enlightening and quite a powerful session. So I'm just going to kind of quickly, for the audience sake, let them know the kinds of things that we're going to talk about for the most part. And then I'm going to have you dive in with some definitions and so forth, if that's okay. Okay, sound good?
Sure.
All right, so we're gonna give some examples of microaggressions. We're gonna first define it. We're gonna give some examples, some case studies that are genuinely lived experiences of my own. We're going to talk about that so folks can understand the impact of microaggressions. We're going to have an opportunity to talk about a particular topic that seems to be something that people of color, particularly Black folk, African American folk, tend to hear a lot, and that is this idea of people being colorblind and sort of why that actually is a microaggression. Wanted to really highlight that. We're going to talk about the harm that microaggressions do both to organizations as well as individuals. We're going to talk about how can we build diverse and inclusive organizations. We'll talk a little bit about how microaggressions can be weaponized in a way that that folks really need to understand. But mostly, we want to be able to share with, what do you do? What do you do if you find yourself impacted by or on the side of having done a microaggression? How do you repair that? How do you work through that? So, Dr. Roberta, again, just a joy to start this conversation with you. And I want to turn it over to you to really define, if you would, microaggressions. What does it mean? And any other definitions that you'd like to give that we might talk about at the beginning.
Sure. And I just want to thank you so much, both Jamie and Kim, for having me, and for the Rotarians. This is just a wonderful opportunity, particularly to interact with folks on the other side of the state and around the country who belong to this phenomenal organization. And one of the things I wasn't mentioned in my bio, which I was like cutting things out, trying not to make it too long, was that I have been a university professor and administrator for over 35 years. And so, yeah, defining things and really laying things out is just something that I do. So just let me give you a couple of definitions that I think are really important. Number one, microaggression. Let me tell you, first of all, how we came about with the term microaggressions. So microaggressions came about in 1970 with Dr. Chester, who was a psychologist at Harvard University. And in his research, he found that particularly African Americans were having problems because of the fact that they were being targeted or involved with insults and things that were impacting their well-being. Okay. And so that was in the 1970s. And then in 2007, Dr. Daryl Wing Sue, who is another psychologist, he really delved in and started breaking down the microaggressions into several different subcategories, as well as describing specifically that it not only impacted African Americans, but other marginalized groups. So in terms of Dr. Sue's definition, microaggressions are what we would consider commonplace verbal or behavioral indignities, insults. And they can be intentional, but very often they are unintentional. And what they do is they communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative racial slights or insults towards a particular group. And then that is something that but the term microaggressions is somewhat of a misnomer, because when you hear the term micro, you think of, oh, it must be just something small. So if it's so small, why are people making a big deal about it? Well, they're making a big deal about it because micro does not necessarily mean that these are small. Okay. And then we're talking about, well, let me back up a little bit. They can be small if it was just one incident. But the thing about microaggressions is that it's usually not just one time. It's usually the same type of indignities that are happening over and over and over again. And so if you think about it, and I meant to have my books with me, but I didn't, think about if you just had one book, okay, if I was just holding one book, it would not be hard to carry. But if someone piled another book and then another book and then another book, and another book. And just think, the books are up to here. I would be like this. So it would be very oppressive after a while. And that's what microaggressions are. They are oppressive because this is happening over and over and over and over and over and over again to marginalized groups. Okay. And so that's the problem with microaggressions. And so recently, Jana and Barron came up with another term to kind of better describe what we're talking about. And they call it subtle acts of exclusion. And this, they felt, was a better term than microaggressions, because a lot of times when people hear the term aggression, that means that they want to think about a hostile act. They want to think about something that was intentional, and I'm intentionally doing something to you. But that's not always the case, because most of the time, what we have been calling microaggressions, which we might be moving toward calling the more subtle acts of exclusion, they really are unintentional. People didn't realize the impact. And you hear a lot of times, well, I didn't mean to do anything or to offend you, but you did. And so that's why we don't like the term microaggression, because aggression, not everyone is being aggressive, but it is doing harm, and it is causing exclusion opposed to inclusion, which is really what we're looking for when we're talking about why this is so important, particularly in organizations and in business. Did that kind of set
That was
you?
that was absolutely powerful, especially the visual of the books piling on top of each other. I believe everybody can sort of feel and see what that would be like, the heavy burden. What I want to do is start off talking about a couple of things that a couple of case studies, a couple of scenarios that have happened to me. And I'd like you to then, after I share it, to talk about sort of what was maybe wrong with that scenario, okay? What could have been different in that particular scenario. Okay, I'm going to
Okay.
start with two of them. I'll start with one. Both of the so I have four. But I'll start with the first one, and it was Rotary. It happened in Rotary. So when I joined Rotary some years ago, a few years back, I did a presentation. Everybody who's a new Rotarian has to make a presentation, and I will say that my Rotary talk was incredible. I got a standing ovation from that, and I was told that never before had there been a standing ovation from a Rotary talk. So my 8 minutes was quite powerful. So I get off the stage, and people are just like, they're fist bumping and shaking my hands, wanting to talk to me. But someone afterward comes up to me and says, "You are so articulate." And I just stopped cold. I just was like, it got under my skin. It wasn't folks saying, "Well, I really like that story that you told. I really like the way you." It was, "You are so articulate," and I just felt like, am I not supposed to be So talk about that if you don't mind, because that is something that happened. The person didn't mean that. I'm sure they meant great intent, because it was a powerful presentation. But that "you are so articulate," I know that that's one that comes up a fair amount in terms of we deal with.
Yes. And what that really, the message that is being conveyed is that you, or quote unquote, your people, are not adequate and are not supposed to be intelligent. And you're not supposed to have this knowledge or skills to be articulate. And so what was stated, the intent was this to be a compliment, ended up being actually an insult. And that is the problem with our microaggressions, or our subtle acts of exclusion. Because when you hear that term, it's like, I don't want to be bothered with you because you're saying that, I shouldn't be able to do this, that I'm an exceptional? Are you saying that, my people aren't knowledgeable and skilled? And so it's having the opposite effect of what was intent, because I believe that the intent was to, to compliment you on what you said, but instead it was offensive. And it was offensive because it was a subtle put down that they did not expect a Black person to be able to give an articulate presentation.
Well, it was definitely a gut punch, and I really felt like they tried to do it, as you said, out of good intentions, right? But it just was a gut punch to me. But okay, let's talk about another one. So I was not too long ago sitting in one of our local parks in a car with a good friend of mine. We were just sitting there preparing to go in to have some lunch in the area, and I saw a Rotarian, and I was like, and this is an African American woman that was in the car with me. And I've been wanting her to kind of join Rotary for a long time, or consider, coming and seeing how Rotary is, and perhaps consider joining it if it was the right thing. But I saw another Rotarian in the park, and Rotarians are very friendly. They joke, they play, they're really really a lot of fun. So I waved the individual over, and before that person came over, I told my friend, "Oh, this is one of our great Rotarians." And the Rotarian came over, older Caucasian person comes over, and there's two Black folks sitting in the SUV, two Black women, and this person says, "What kind of illicit drug activity is going on over here?" Meaning to be funny, right? Meaning to be, and out of the corner of my eye, I'm looking at my friend just sort of freeze up. I'm looking at, the person that came over, and absolutely looking at this individual kind of go, "Oh, I think I made a mistake," and so forth. And this friend is like not going to even consider Rotary until, I mean, it's going to be a long time for me to actually get her to come back. But again, somebody who is used to kind of joking, who is used to kind of, that kind of just walks up and says something to two African American women sitting in a car. What kind of illicit drug activity is going on over here? Break that down for me. What do you see in that scenario?
I see. Well, let me, before I tell you what I see in it, let me tell you my response to it. My response to hearing that was, "Oh my God, they didn't," and I myself would be personally shocked and offended to hear that, because basically it's saying, I, and you think I'm a drug dealer? I mean, especially if it's if I don't know you, you don't know me. That was like, oh no, that is like, no, 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 no. And the reason why it's no, 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 because it is stereotyped. It is a classic stereotype. We're talking about drug dealers and illicit drugs and all those. Is that all you think about Black people? Is that really what you think? And that would be kind of my response. But then, understanding that joking is something that people do, and they banter. And I was listening the other day to Bill Maher, who does a lot of political satire and joking and commentaries and things like that. And he's considered a comedian, even though he's very political. And he was saying, well, as a comedian, we can't say anything anymore because everything is going to be off limits. And it's not that everything is going to be off limits, but people need to be sensitive about how things may impact different groups. And we do have different perspectives and different views on the world. And given certain historical context, we need to be more sensitive, culturally sensitive, and understand the impact. And one of the things, there's something called, people may have heard about the golden rule. Do unto others as I would have them do unto me, that kind of thing. But I say, the platinum rule.
The platinum rule.
Let's go to the platinum rule. The golden rule is good, but we need the platinum rule. Because the platinum rule says, I don't want to just do to others the way I want things done, but I want to consider what that other person needs. Because my needs and my reality is not the same as yours. I have friends, like I say, for instance, I always tell, I have a friend who is Japanese, and and when he came here recently, and he said he wanted to take me out to lunch, and he said he wanted to take me to an authentic Japanese restaurant. The name of the place was sushi.com, and I was like, I don't know, I don't eat sushi. And I said, do they have something else? And he was like, yes, they have other things. And I was like, fine. As long as you understand that sushi is something that you may appreciate, but it's not something that I appreciate. So if all they're going to serve is sushi, then you're not giving me a treat. And so we need to understand that also when it comes to issues of what we say, how we joke, because just because you think it's funny does not necessarily mean that it's funny to somebody else.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And I definitely understand the platinum rule, having had twin boys in my world. And Stephen did not like sweets, and Thomas did. And so we get the Thomas some ice cream and something else for Stephen every time we go out. So I do think, though, that in that scenario, that particular scenario, that individual saw that mistake instantly. I mean, you could see it on that person's face. They saw the reaction and so forth. So we have a question that goes back before we move on. I see there's a question that's been raised that goes back to the articulate. You are so articulate, and it's somebody wants to know. So if somebody says you are so articulate to a white man, that's the question.
Well, the question is why are you saying the person is articulate? Are you saying that the person is? Are you saying that you should not expect that person to be articulate? I think we need to think about what we're saying. How about saying, I really enjoyed your speech. The content was great. Your execution was wonderful. All of those kinds of things, which is saying that they're articulate. But why would you say they're articulate? Because it's still, even if I'm a white person, are you saying you don't think I should be articulate? I went to school, all
Right.
of those kinds of things. So language matters, and language is powerful. And
Absolutely.
language can either be used to hurt or to heal. And a lot of times, the language that we are using is causing detriment. And I know there's a lot of talk about, well, freedom of speech, freedom of speech, freedom of speech. I should be able to say whatever I want to say. I disagree. I think that everyone should be able to have a voice and share their opinion. But I think that it should also be done with respect and humility. And that's just my personal opinion, because I believe that everyone needs to be respected. And if I am having a conversation with you, and I want to have a meaningful conversation with you, and I want to have an authentic relationship with you so that we can work together and interact together in a positive way, then I want to make sure that I'm respecting you. Because
Absolutely.
if I'm not respecting you and you're not respecting me, then we there's no way that we can build a positive relationship. And that
Absolutely.
is going to impact how we work together, how our organization functions, and things of that nature.
Absolutely. So I know that folks are going to want to know how to resolve, like how to when things happen, like who's responsible, and that. Let's get to that in a bit. I want to do two more case studies, and then we'll certainly answer some of those kind of questions about what do you do when you're impacted, or if you were the one who inadvertently or whatever, did some type of subtle act against someone, or microaggression. So let's talk about this idea of people saying that I'm colorblind, because and they mean that with good intent. I've had people say, Kim, I'm colorblind. They're standing right next to me because I love you. I don't see your color, and I'm looking at them like they are absolutely like insane. I can't be this big and walk in a room looking like this, right? And proud of who I am, and they can't see my color. And their intent is like, I don't want to make a big deal of that or what have you, but they're not getting past layers of who I really am. Let's talk about the idea of people saying that they're colorblind, right? Because that is a sort of a microaggression to some of us.
Mhm,
And I know a lot of us had some conversation around this recently, and we're like, we've all experienced this,
mhm,
and then we'll go into two more scenarios. So let's
mhm.
talk about that.
Well, having worked at Whitworth University, which, for those of you who may not know, is a private Presbyterian, predominantly white university, and I taught there for 14 years. Most of the students who I worked with had limited, if any, experiences with people of color, and I probably, for the most part, was the first African American female that they had as a professor and saw as an associate dean and all of those kinds of things. And they would say all the time, but I was taught to be colorblind. Part of the problem is our society has ingrained in people that topics of race and diversity should not be discussed. If they were taboo, they were off the table. And that's why we have a lot of the problems that we have in terms of microaggressions and communication is because we were taught, or they were taught, certain groups were taught not to talk about it. And to say that you're colorblind as a way of not dealing with the reality right in front of you. But when you don't deal with the reality right in front of you, that is denying who a person is. And I tell people, my students, that all the time. I know you see me. I know you know that I am an African American woman. So clearly you see, I said, unless you have a medical condition that causes you to be colorblind, you are not colorblind. Don't say that. And don't tell me that you don't see my color. Because when you do, you're saying that you're denying part of who I am. Some people may not, but I am very proud of my African ancestry. And I don't want to deny it. And when you deny it, you're denying a part of who I am. And that means that you're not accepting me. And you don't want me to be my authentic self. That would be like telling, a white person, take off your white skin. I don't want that. I don't want to know about that. A Jewish person, I don't want to know that you're Jewish. That's not important. Yes, they are important. All of those things. Diversity matters. Your inclusion matters. Your culture matters. And guess what? Everybody has a culture. Even white people have culture. Yes,
Um,
you do.
The reason I'm laughing is because I hear white people all the time say they don't have culture, and they lean on me all the time. Oh, you got culture. We don't have culture. It's pretty interesting to me. So
Yes, but white people
thank
have
you for pointing
culture.
that out.
They do. Even
Thank
if
you.
it's baseball culture, if
Thank
it's
you.
soccer, if it's hockey, that's a culture.
And there's things that you do with your families. There's all kinds of there's
Exactly.
all
And,
kinds of
and let
stuff
me,
that
and
happens.
a definition I did not give that I wanted to throw out there is that when we're talking about diversity, diversity is not just black and white or male and female, or some people want to throw in now sexual orientation. It is about the full breadth of human difference. So every way that you can think about that a person is different, that's a part of diversity.
Love it. Love that. Thank you for that. So I want to, in terms of the colorblind, I want to give two examples where I can show you that folks are not colorblind, at least when it comes to me. And one of them is quite hilarious, I think, but both of them a bit tragic in a way. So a few years back, I had just come out of hanging out in a park. I was just I had gone to a Pride festival out in Bremerton, Washington, and after that, I ran my dog around the park, et cetera, et cetera. And I was a little hungry, so I came back. And in town, I stopped by a major grocery store. I won't say what the name of the store is, but a major grocery chain store, and went to their deli. And in front of me, there was a white couple, and behind me, there was a black couple. And it was a Sunday, so they were dressed up pretty good. I had on a t-shirt, had my hat turned on backwards, looked like I'd been running my dog in the park, what have you. And the white couple in front of me ordered a couple of hot sandwiches. I think they got I don't remember. I think one was a Reuben and another one was some kind of panini, something or another. And so it was my turn. And the young person, it was a young person, probably not too long out of high school, that was preparing the meals back there. And so it was my turn. Everybody was still in line. The two couples, I'm sandwiched in between the two couples. And the young man, he says, well, what would you like to order? Nice guy, really nice young man. And I said, oh yeah, I'd like to have the chicken sandwich, the chicken breast sandwich. And I said, oh, by the way, would you mind warming up my chicken? I like that warm. And he looked at me and instantly said, well, we don't take SNAP cards. You can't use your SNAP card for warmed up meat. You're not allowed to have cooked food. And I'm thinking, what is a SNAP card, number one? And then it dawned on me, like a SNAP card is like the card that if you are receiving support from welfare kind of support. And I'm thinking, I got a MasterCard and a Visa card, and he's looking and he's like, your SNAP card. I said, my what? Because I didn't know my what card? He says, we don't take your SNAP card. And the couple behind me, African American couple, looked at me, and I'm looking at them. It's totally like embarrassing. I'm like, I don't have a SNAP card. I never pulled out any kind of card. I want my sandwich made warm, and and so I said, you know what I want you to do, young man? I want you to bring the manager. I don't want the deli manager. I want the store manager here. I got really loud, really obnoxious, and said, I want the store manager here right now. And it kind of went down like that. I took that all the way up the chain, went all the way up through the whole chain over time to talk about that. But I wanted to teach that young man a lesson because he made this assumption, looking at me, black, a woman, probably looked like I'd been in the park or whatever he associated with that, and told me that without asking any questions, just told me that my SNAP card would not be I would not be able to use a SNAP card, my SNAP card. And so, yeah, what can you talk a little bit about what could have happened, what he might have done differently, just break that scenario down for me. That's a lived experience for me.
That's a lived experience, and unfortunately, too many. And a part of that, I would say, is stereotypes, probably implicit bias, because probably if you were to ask this young man if he was racist or biased or anything like that, he would say absolutely not. He would probably argue you down if you would try to tell him otherwise, because he was probably not aware that he had these biases. But reality is, and this is another one, all people have biases. All people rely on stereotypes. Why? Because that's part of how the brain works. The brain categorizes information. And when it puts it into categories, because the brain is trying to think fast. It's kind of like a computer. It's like going fast. And so we're putting things in there. And so I'm going to think about what I have been referred to or what I've been taught in the past, and I'm lumping everything in that category. And so the problem with stereotypes is that they're only partially true. So yes, it is probably true that there are Black people who have SNAP cards, but the reality is the majority of people who are on welfare and public assistance are white people. But that story is typically not told. So this is the stereotype that he has. And his manager probably said, you cannot take this. So that's been ingrained in his head. So he says, Black people, SNAP card are typically the ones who I know have SNAP cards. So therefore she must have one. The better way of doing this would have been to say, excuse me, ma'am, how would you like to pay for this? And then if you said, I have a SNAP card, then he could say to you, well, I'm sorry, for warm food, we cannot take the SNAP card. And then that would have avoided it, because it would have not made the assumption that just because you're Black, that you're poor, that you're on welfare, and you need the SNAP card to be able to pay for your food, opposed to using American Express or whatever credit cards that you have. And so it's about thinking of, it's just not making these assumptions. And there's a saying about what happens when people make assumptions. Yes, I'm not going to say it, but sometimes it can get us in trouble. So we don't want to make assumptions. So rather than make an assumption, we can just ask. And I tell people, because this is another one, and it's kind of, well, what do I call you? Are you Black? Are you African American? Or do you want to be called the N-word? No, definitely not. Okay. And I say, ask people what they want to be called. Don't assume.
Makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. I do the same as much as I'm able to. So I've never tried to destroy anybody's life, but and so I didn't go that hard after the kid, but I did take it all the way up, and I wanted him to learn a lesson about that, because it was it was embarrassing. It was really very,
It's
I mean,
very
yeah, it
embarrassing.
was very embarrassing, like it was embarrassing because it was stupid. It was just ridiculous, and I'm caught in the middle of this ridiculousness, and it just all eyes were on me in the store, so I had to focus all eyes on him. So the last one I want to share, and it's quite interesting, is there's a little casino in my neighborhood, and I go to it every now and again, and I live in a community where there's really, I mean, there's hardly any Black folk out here in Kingston, and so very few Black people, or even show up at the casino. So on this particular, they have these drawings. They have these particular drawings, and they were $1,000 drawings. And I was in the casino, just sitting at a machine and minding my own business, and they called out a name. I wasn't really paying attention. I just knew it wasn't my name. And a guy, he wasn't part of the casino, like he wasn't one of the staff or whatever, but a white guy comes running. I mean, just running at full speed toward me. And he gets to me and he's like, Luella, they're calling your name. You better get up there and get your money. You got 3 minutes to get up there. They're calling your name. I don't want you to, my name is not Luella. And so I'm looking around like, who's Luella? He's like, he just made this assumption that this was me. And it was quite interesting. So, and here's what's so funny about it. Not only was my name not, I would have been Luella for that 1,000 if they would let me swap for
I
that
know
moment.
that's right.
I'd take that $1,000, But my actual name is actually Alexandria. So a lot of people know it, a lot of people don't. It's Alexandria Kim, right? Alexandria Kim. People call me Kim. So had they called the name out, which they have in the past, called Alexandria, I don't think he would have been running up to say, go get your money. So talk a little bit about that scenario, because again, that's the last one I want to share about some experience. But talk about that.
Well, that is another one of those cases where, it's a stereotype based on names. and, you know, a microaggression, and that, you know, Black people have certain kinds of names. And that's why it is, unfortunately, this is really a problem in the workplace, because people look at names. An application may come in, and because of a name looks like it's African American or Hispanic or something like that, applications have been thrown out, and people have not even been given the opportunity to interview for jobs. And talk about being exclusive rather than inclusive. And as we are trying to become more diverse and to make sure that people are included, when you do things like this, you're could be excluding some very qualified people. And that is really, that's really a problem. And then what also happens is it puts an extra burden on the person of color to have to constantly prove that I'm twice as good, I can actually do it, because all of these assumptions have been made about what you can't do and how you can't go forward, and those kinds of things. And microaggressions and these subtle acts of exclusions, they have a long-term impact. They cause the erosion of mental health. They cause the erosion of people's physical health, cause problems with blood pressure and stress and anxiety. Then imagine that if you are in a workplace, then that person may not even want to volunteer, or otherwise they may do the opposite. They may be trying to kill themselves to prove that I am better. And so all of those things really can have a negative impact. And so that's why we really have to be careful of microaggressions and these subtle acts of exclusion, because we're living in a day and age where we want to promote people coming together with greater understanding and cultural sensitivity.
I agree with that, but let me ask this question: Can microaggressions be sort of used in sort of a weaponized kind of way? I know that these days people can't. I know these days there's a lot of concern about folks who are perhaps not wanting to bring everybody together, right? More, there's a lot of
Yeah.
stuff going on in the nation right now. And you can't call people loudly or publicly, derogatory terms and so forth. So can microaggressions be used in any kind of weaponized kind of way?
Absolutely, absolutely, especially because they're subtle. And another part of microaggressions that makes them really deadly is the fact that they're ambiguous. And so another term that has surfaced is called gaslighting or race lighting. And this is really it's like psychological manipulation. And this is when microaggressions are being weaponized because things are purposely being done. We talked before about how very often microaggressions are unintentional. But like you say, there are certain people who really aren't about unity. They're really not about working together effectively across cultures. And so what they want to do is they want to do whatever they can to manipulate a person to think that you're going crazy, this isn't, there's something wrong with them. And a lot of it, they call, another example would be people who do passive aggressive type things. my husband is from the South, and so he has all these little Southern sayings like, when like throw a rock and hide their hand. And so that's the kind of thing that when you think about these gaslighting kinds of situations, they will do things to set up a person for them to fail, or if not fail, just to question their own ability to function.
Okay.
And this psychological manipulation, it's rough, because you're like, what's going on here? Am I going crazy? Is there, what did I do? Those kinds of things. And so, yes, it definitely can be weaponized. And when we see that happening, we need to stand up for people.
So Rotarians live by an awesome motto, service above self. We've got our 4-way test. Is it the here, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill, better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all? And so I believe that when, for the most part, when a microaggression happens between a Rotarian or within the Rotary Club, it's very much inadvertent, unintentional, kind of microaggressions, right? And so I know that our audience of Rotarians would probably really want to know, like, how can they what do they do if they've unintentionally impacted someone, or if they've been impacted? Like, is there a process, or are there things they can do to sort of resolve that? And then how can they enter into a sort of a reparative conversation with someone that they may have impacted with a microaggression? Can you kind of talk about that a bit?
Mm-hmm. I'm going to talk up to you about two things, and I'm going to acronyms are big, and so I'm going to give you two different acronyms. One is my real, but before I get to my real, I want to talk about address, ADDRESS. So if you see a microaggression, or even if you have experienced a microaggression, it needs to be addressed. And the A stands for number one, acknowledge that something happened. Because very often we want to pretend like nothing happened and everything's okay. It's not. If you are the recipient or the target of it, something happens. Then you need to let people know, because if people don't know what they've done, they're going to continue doing it. Okay. If you are the one who did it and you don't know you did something, if you see the response from the other person backing up, or they stop talking to you, then ask them, did I do something to offend you? I notice you're not talking to me like you used to, or whatever. So address the issue. So that's the first thing. And then D is dialogue. Sometimes you don't need to dialogue with the person in the moment. Sometimes you do, and sometimes you don't, depending on the situation. Say, for instance, if it is a situation with a bunch of people, you might want to wait and pull that person aside and say, hey, that thing that you said when we were in that group, it really bothered me. And let me tell you why. But then it may be that you actually do need to, like you did, address it in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that first D stands for to dialogue. And then the second D stands for document. Mm-hmm. You need to, particularly if this is a workplace and your job may be on the line, you need to document what is being happened, because if you are repeatedly being harassed, demeaned, or disrespected, then unless you have some kind of documentation, then you're going to have a hard time getting anyone to support you. And then you can even say, well, on this day, I told my supervisor that Joe Blow did blah, 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 blah. So documentation is helpful. And if, a lot of workplaces, they have bias reporting systems, and if need be, just report it through that bias reporting system. And sometimes it's not that you're necessarily going to do anything about it, but sometimes it's a systemic problem. So it's not necessarily an individual problem, but it may be a greater organizational problem. And so if it's an organizational problem, then somebody within the organizational structure that has some authority needs to address the problem. Okay. And then R stands for redirect. Like, say, for instance, if you notice that maybe a person with disabilities, someone is making fun of them or whatever, then you can, if you don't feel comfortable saying, hey, stop, this is just not appropriate, maybe redirect the conversation in another direction. So that is something else that can be done. E, educate. Educate the person. Educate yourself. S, stop the exclusionary behavior. If someone is being excluded, if you see that every day at lunch, Keisha is not being invited to lunch, or when they bring coffee and donuts, everyone gets a donut, but she doesn't, then you can stop that exclusionary behavior and say, hey, I noticed every day we're not giving Keisha a donut. What's up with that? Let's make sure that she has one too, because she's a part of our team, and that's really important. And then S, support. Support the people who are impacted. And that's really important, because it's not just the person who is the target, but it's also the people who are around. Like, say, for instance, I was in an event where someone offended one particular person. And so it was a back and forth between these two people, but everyone in the room was impacted. And so they needed support. And so I had to pull a group of people together and talk about it and help them to process what they were going with, because they were impacted, even though it was not a direct target against them. And so I think that's one way of looking at it, using that address model. And then the model that I developed, which is, I call my real diversity, equity, and inclusion framework, because I said it's time for people to get real about diversity. Because too often people, they just want to say they're doing this, and, they want to do things performatively or just for optics. But I'm like, time out for that. People are dying on a regular basis. And so we have to get real. And so the R stands for 3 things. Each of these are 3 things: relationship, reflection, and response. Authentic relationship with people. Before you start talking about someone, get to know them. Build authentic relationships. Reflect on what your relationship has been like. And then maybe I may say, well, was I really treating Keisha right? No, I really wasn't. And so then I'm going to become more responsive, culturally responsive to how I respond to her. Then E stands for educate. Educate yourself. Start with self. I always say, always start with self. And that goes also when we're thinking about relationship. We need to think about my relationship with myself, my relationship with others, and then my relationship with God or my spiritual being, because that provides you with your moral compass. And I believe that a lot of us have lost our moral compass, and why we are not treating each other in more humane ways. And then engagement. Engage with other people. We talk about what we know. You don't know another culture. Well, because you don't interact with them. Get out of your comfort zone. Go to events where there are people who look different from you. And then Once you know, then empower somebody else. Authentic. As I said, I'm big on authentic relationships. And then assessment. Let's find out what you know. And so I do an assessment, the intercultural development inventory, and a number of other assessments when we can find out what are your cultural skills, where are your gaps, and then let's try to fill in those gaps. And then hopefully you'll become actualized, that you will be a more culturally sensitive and responsive person. And then the L stands for, which is an important part, lived experience with a lifelong process and a lifestyle of diversity and social justice. You have to make this a lifestyle. This is not a one and done. I can take a workshop, I can come to a class and I've arrived. No, cultural awareness, it's a journey. It's a lifelong process. And we have to continue to grow and develop along the way. And so these are just some of the things that you can do to make sure that you avoid microaggressions and subtle acts of exclusion.
This is really beautiful. I really, really appreciate having the opportunity to spend an hour with you. I believe Jamie's going to come back on and do sort of a wrap up for us. But again, this has just been, I think, a real gift to our community. And so thank you so much. Oh, there's Jamie. Hey, Jamie, you're back. Give us a little wrap up here. All right.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. I don't hear you, Jamie, so I don't know if you're muted or what, but I know you're trying to come back on.
Here we go. It's even after a year, the struggle is real with mute.
Yes, it is. We all do it from time to time.
It's every day a challenge. So I want to just thank everybody for joining us this afternoon for this important topic, especially Kim and Dr. Roberta for leading us in this discussion, and really for sharing very personal and impactful stories of how you both have experienced the world. I will remind folks that while these are Dr. Roberta and Kim's stories, these dynamics are so large that most Black folks in this conversation would be shaking their head and having those same experiences. So I think that really speaks to the widespread nature of some of these dynamics. And so, again, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and expertise. We would like to share some opportunities with folks of how they can get a hold of Dr. Roberta and her work that she is doing around diversity, equity, and inclusion. I believe we have a flyer that we can put up on screen now. There we go. And so this is an opportunity again to do some deeper learning with Dr. Roberta Wilburn, and the next opportunity will be, let me take down our little banner here because it's in the way. The next opportunity that Dr. Roberta will have will be this weekend. And so for more information on that, we'll have that posted to the Rotary DEI page, along with any resources that were shared today during our session. So again, thank you so much for this conversation.
I want to tell about my book.
Wonderful. Yes, please do.
And yes, and I also have this book, and it's just, and this book is special because it's not just me, but it's 17 other Black authors, and it's Make It Matter: How to Create a Life of Unforgettable Impact and Abundant Fulfillment. And it is sharing the perspective of a variety of people from different backgrounds. And my chapter, of course, is about making your inclusion matter.
Thank you. That is the next book I will be purchasing to go. This is not a background, my actual bookshelf behind me. So thank you again. I've had the opportunity to know Kim and Dr. Roberta for quite a while. I've learned so much from both of them. and their journeys, and really hope that those folks that were joining us today really learn some new information and walk away with some behaviors that you can change today to start building more inclusive organizations and communities. We are really in a time right now of a reckoning around race and issues of equity. And please don't discount those small steps that you can take that really add up to big impact. And so it is those everyday interactions of how we see people and respect people and value people. So again, thanks. This has been a wonderful conversation. I'd also like to share with folks that we will continue our conversation next Tuesday afternoon, same time, same place. And we will be diving into recruiting and how can we shake up our recruiting efforts so that we can create more inclusive clubs here in our neck of the world and for all of those clubs nationally and internationally. So thanks again. We'll sign off for today. Wonderful conversation and look forward to many more to come. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you all.